In this video, I'm going to show you how to modify an affordable circle jig and make it into a professional tool that will allow you to get more out of your router. It's a circle jig with an incremental system made of aluminum. It only costs around 25 euros, so I don't think it's worth it to build it at home. It's a little hard to make an incremental system that works accurately. This jig comes with an optional fixed router base, but I don't recommend buying it at all. Instead, we could use the fixed aluminum base that comes with these kinds of routers, but this base has the downside that it doesn't have a plunge system, which in my opinion is indispensable to use with these kinds of router jigs. Therefore, I decided to modify and improve this jig so that we can use it with the plunge base that usually comes with these routers. Besides allowing us to start the milling jobs more easily, this kind of plunge base has an accurate stop and accessories so that you can connect it to a vacuum. The only drawback is that it's a little heavier than the fixed base. In order to use it with this jig, I have to raise it a little, about 6 millimeters. I plan to make a system to attach my router to the jig in a quick and convenient way. I waste quite a bit of time every time I have to attach my router to a jig, which led me to develop a new and innovative coupling system. I'm going to use the same lock system used in these bases to attach the parallel guide. This is the 3D design included in the plans you can download for free in my website. I'll leave a link in the video description. They also include a printable template that you can stick on the board to make the job easier. Attaching the router to the DIY base is this simple and quick. First, we have to screw the base to the jig using the holes that come by default. After that, we only have to insert the base into the steel pipes of the jig and tighten the 3 knobs that come with the plunge base to lock the parallel guide. It's that quick. I think this is a perfect system to add to any router jig you have at home. I'm going to run some tests with the board I had already used to try my other DIY incremental circle jig for use with a router table and bandsaw. I'll leave a link in the description for this video in case you're interested in finding out more about this other jig. First of all, we have to drill a hole in the board to insert the steel rod that acts as rotation axis, and then position the jig. I'm going to set the depth for the router. It seems the jig works wonderfully. The only problem is that the power cord and the vacuum tube get a little tangled when milling. I have to come up with a system to hang them from the ceiling. This is the circle with the smallest diameter I can make with this jig, around 40 millimeters. I'm going to use the incremental system to move the milling by about 2 millimeters. I'm going to mill again to check the maximum diameter with this other jig, about 150 millimeters. In order to cut at wider diameters, I modified another cheap jig that I have to fasten to the first one with bolts. I had to cut it down a little, but this will allow me to continue using the first jig's incremental system. Thanks to this modification, I can mill circles from 530 millimeters to 1060 millimeters in diameter. Between the capacity of both jigs, there are diameters I can't cut. I'm trying to come up with ways to solve this. The incremental jig comes with a small parallel guide that has two drawbacks. It has a little play, and besides, it doesn't have an incremental system. I've managed to come up with a single solution to solve both problems at once. I made a new wooden guide in which I can insert the steel rod that acts as a rotation axis. This way I can use the incremental system, and by having two locking points, the issue with the play is completely gone. With this improvement, I can mill more accurately. I can also use the rotary tool plunge base as before. It will be a perfect combination for small milling projects that require a great deal of accuracy. Now I'll show you how to make this quick install base for a router. First off, we have to cut the HPL panel to size with a table saw. Now I'll stick the printable template onto it to make it easier to drill the holes and machine the piece. I drill the holes with a column drill and cut with the bandsaw. I'm going to bezel the inner edges with a router. With a thread tap, I thread the holes to fasten this base to the circle jig. I cut the two wooden pieces where I'm going to insert the steel pipe to size, albeit a little longer. I mark the center and drill a hole with a bit whose diameter is 1 millimeter wider than the pipe I'm going to use. By drilling a hole that's slightly wider, I can correct any potential deviations in the hole. I'm also going to mark the curve I have to make to adapt it to my router's plunge base. I make sure everything's correct, and after cutting the pipes to size, I can glue them to the wooden pieces. On the corner where I can use a tightening knob, I'll use a wedge to fasten the pipe. I've used a file to cut some marks on the steel. By doing this, the epoxy adhesive will be more effective. On a flat surface, I glue the steel pipes to the two wooden pieces, being careful not to also glue the router's plunge base. Now I'll use a bit of the same diameter as the central hole of the HPL base to center the router's plunge base. Once this is done, I'll use cyanoacrylate to glue the two wooden pieces onto the HPL. Once the glue is dry, I can finish drilling the holes and placing the screws. With the sanding disc, I sand down all the edges of the base. It's time to make the parallel guide. I'll use a piece of hard wood. I drill a hole to bring this guide closer to the router bit, and I also drilled two countersink holes on the aluminum parallel guide. I mark the position of the holes in the wood and fasten it to the aluminum with the screws. Now I'm going to mark the hole that will allow us to use the incremental system. I have to enlarge the diameter of the aluminum pipe that will act as a rotation axis a little. Once this is done, we only need to glue it to the wood. Finally, all that's left is to modify the large circle jig. I'm going to cut its base plate so that we can continue using the small jig's knob. I'll cut it with a bandsaw. I drilled two countersunk holes to fasten it. In the other jig, I drilled two more holes that I will have to thread for a metric 5 bolt. I also have to cut a small recess so that I can turn the adjusting knob. Thank you for watching this video until the end. I'll see you again in a few days.